So welcome also from my side. I'm Kai Köhne, working here for the Qt company in Berlin. Actually started as a developer 11 years almost now ago, working on Qt. And the very first topic I was kind of being assigned to, or the very first project, was Linguist, our translation toolchain. So since basically this time it has a place in my heart, the whole topic of internationalization and localization, and that's why I'm actually very happy to talk about this today and present it to you. So it's actually quite a broad topic, so you could approach it from very low, like Lars did briefly in the keynotes, where he was talking about Unicode support and what is there, and we could talk about ICU. We could also take a very high-level view and talk about, in general, how translations should be done and paradigms and whatnot. Because I've just limited time, I try to focus a bit on a very, let's say, programmer-centric view. So I assume that quite a few actually write code, C++ and Qt code. And I'd like to start with that. And I'd also focus a bit on translations, actually, because that's the biggest topic that you usually encounter if you ever want to localize an application. So we will start with having a look at the API, how to prepare your application for translation. Then I will want to move on and show you briefly how the whole tooling workflow is in a very simple example. So we will translate a simple application, and then if time permits, I also want to mention at least further API that should be of interest to you. All right, so the one API that probably most of you, if you have ever programmed Qt either in C++ or QML, know about and have seen is TR. TR stands for translate. And, well, that's what it does. So you pass in a string, literal, and TR at runtime then tries to find an installed translation for that. And if it finds a translation, it returns it. Otherwise, it will return the original string. So far, so good. So that works for C++, and in QML, it's QSTR, but basically it's the same. But there is actually some not dark corners, but some things to know about TR. So for instance, in C++, do you know where actually TR is defined? Like, is it a macro? Is it function? Where is the definition? QObject? Thanks for saying that. Yes, there is a TR in QObject, but that's not actually the one that you should use and are usually using, because what you are using is the TR that is defined by, well, it's the QObject, but the macro. So it's not the class, it's the macro that automatically injects, resolves to a static inline QString TR and friends. Now, why that? Because TR has the notion of a context. So, I mean, the one thing we've seen so far is pretty clear. You know, there is a string, but there is also an implicit context that kind of you can see in the whole tool chain. And that is to divide the whole translations and group them semantically together. So, first of all, that translators, can see, OK, that all belongs to the same dialogue, but also that you don't have conflicts, because there can be cases where the same string is the same in English or whatever language you prefer, you write your native UI in, but might require different translations in other languages. So that's the two reasons why you have a context, and Qt early on decided to make that very easy for you and provide a default context. So in C++, that's actually usually the class name. So if you are calling TR inside a method of a QObject that, for instance, you wrote your own, then this is the context. And in QML, it's actually the name of the QML file. So, and that's actually one reason why you always should add a Q_object to your class if you're deriving from QObject. Because if not, then there are inconsistencies, and you will have unpleasant surprises if you're trying to translate it. If you ever have a situation where you are actually want to translate something, but you are not in a QObject-derived class or in another class, there is also a very explicit one. There is Q declare TR function that take the context explicitly. Now, okay, we've been talking about context. There is more arguments that you can pass. One is, well, it's disambiguation, or should have copied that not wittily. So there is disambiguation, which is just a string for exactly that use case. Even within the same context, you might have strings that you want to have at least give the translator the opportunity to translate in two different ways. So that's sometimes used, albeit not that often. The more interesting argument is actually an integer, and that's for plural forms. Why? Because often you have dialogues like one file copied, two files copied. You notice there is a plural form. And the TR toolchain can actually be used to actually really locate that and not write file parenthesis s. We come to an example to that in a second. All right, with that, I'd like to quickly check back with you whether you're actually listening to me. So why shouldn't you ever use that one, that form? Context, because yes, I mean, it actually works, but the translator will say, okay, this string belongs to QObject. And if you do that everywhere in your class, all your strings will belong to QObject, and honestly speaking, it's not nice. So usually people do that because they know they should somehow call TR, but for some reason it doesn't work. Oh, I'm not in the right class, so they resorting to that. If you ever encounter that, prefer other ways. Either, do this translation in something that has TR, or you can also kind of explicitly call TR on a class, so it's a public method. Or you can also go, if you're, for instance, in main and there is no real kind of natural class to place that in, you can also make it explicit by qcore application translate and then pass the context there. All right, some more things that you might see but should probably point out in a code review. So what is problematic with that call? So someone said, okay, I want to translate that, and then there is a flexible part, and I just want to append a string there. What might be problematic with that? Yes, it implies a certain grammar, right? That the first name will always be the last one in the sentence, which is not necessarily the case. So whenever you see something like that, always prefer this mode. I mean, if you have using QString, you probably know that these placeholders, %1, %2, and the nice thing about this is that the translator can then decide to move it around. All right, that, by the way, also works for QML. So most of the examples I have are now for C++, but you can pretty much do all the same in QML too. Another example. So someone actually, tried to do it right and said, I don't want to write items. So he tried to provide two different translations. What might be problematic with that? Pardon? Plural support? Russian support, yes, exactly, and other languages. So in English, you have a singular form and a plural form. Fair enough, but in other languages, I'm actually not sure how it is in Russia. How it is in Russian? Okay. Well, in Polish, I know it's different. So there might be more forms. There is not just one plural form. It might differ between 7 and 8 items. And even if you look at just French, right? So what about 0? Is it 0 items or 0 item? Well, I heard that in French it's 0 item, well, translated. So there is all these kinds of peculiarities. So don't do that. Rather use the form that I've been mentioning before with the n, and give the translator the chance to actually build the right plural forms. Actually, I did another small optimization here. I was not using %n, but %ln. And L, big L, stands for localized, and that will mean that the number will have a localized form. So for instance, in Germany, and you found 1,000 items that will be written at 1.000 items. So kind of that numbers are grouped together correctly. All right, last of these anti-patterns. So sometimes, I mean, yes, you are always advised to just use the string there, but sometimes you also want to have the string in one place. So tr takes a qstring, so you can also just call it like that. Can anybody point out what's difficult? Exactly. So the keyword is lupdate here. And I will come to lupdate in a second, but just quickly introduce you to the workaround here. And that is that whenever you have that, there is also a way to say, it's called Qt translate no-op. That's a macro that resolves to nothing at compile time. But lupdate, that magic tool, will be informed that this string is actually in following context, so that translators will see it. Because that will work at runtime, but there won't be any translation ever, because the translator doesn't know. So yeah, that sounded a bit weird. So what about lupdate? To understand that, we have to look a bit at the toolchain, because tr is not only a function, it's also a marker, together with Qt core application translate and Qt translate no-op and so on. What it does, it marks strings for translation, because this translator has to, he doesn't want to kind of read your source code, right, and look into UI files and whatnot. He wants to have just a list of strings to translate. So there is a tool for that since forever, which is called lupdate, and that you can run on your either on a directory or on a project, and that will scan all the source files for strings and contexts. So it has to also understand a bit of C++. So there is a simple C++ parser, for instance, involved, and will extract these contexts and strings into a TS file. A TS file is just an XML format, very simple, which you can then pass to a translator, and the translator, it might be you, can then actually do the translation. So we have our own translation tool called Qt Linguist, but there are others too. And I also have to say that there is not only one the TS format is our own one, but there is also PO and XLIF and whatnot. So there is different other file formats which you can also use. So there is a nice tool called lconvert that helps you converting between all these different formats. But for the very simple case that you are, everybody's using Qt and is happy with Qt Linguist, you can stay with TS and do the translation. Now at one point, you want to package that up. And because TS, it's kind of an XML file format, but actually not very fast to load and process. There is kind of a binary format, which is just the same, just compressed and optimized for lookup, and that's QM. And there is a tool called lrelease, will take the TS file, put it into a QM file, and that one then you can install into your application. So I'd like to actually show to you how that looks in a real world example. Well, real world. In a simple example. So this is a very, very simple program, actually using widgets. Just has a dialog in a form file, and that's it basically. We will see later how the UI, or I can open the designer file at least. So you see it has a simple UI, and there is text, and yeah, the text is in English by default. So if I look into, for instance, the dialog CPP, again, that's just an implementation, but I also see that there is some more text. So that's it, a couple of texts. And we have already done the work and added TR here. Actually, in the UI files, by default, texts are translatable, marked as translatable. But in the project file, we also listed 2 translation files. So here I'm saying that I want to have 2 translations of my app. One is for DE, so German, and one is for English. Furthermore, I have set one define, which is handy, Qt restricted cast from ASCII. You might also want to use Qt no cast from ASCII. So that's best practice, which makes sure that you can't easily just use a string literal at a place where a QString is expected, so that you have to make a conscious choice. This is to be translated, wrap in tr, or this is not to be translated, wrap it in, for instance, with qlatin one string. So that's good practice to set. Finally, a new feature in 5.12. You can tell QMake, in this case, to actually run this lrelease tool automatically and package it up so that it ends up in the Qt resource system. Fair enough. That's the project file format. What I will do now is, first of all, run. I can try to build it, but probably it won't build because it says, yeah, there are no TS files, yes. So we have to first run lupdate. And it says here in the output that it actually found 4 source texts, that the TS file wasn't there, so there was no existing one. So the lupdate, I mean, it's an intelligent updater. It doesn't just throw away the existing translation. But in this case, there was no translation, so it created these 2 files. All right. So I just hope that. No, I didn't want to do that. I want to open the. Yeah, you see that there is an XML file, but actually I want to open it with Qt Linguist. Qt Linguist is our translation tool. It also has quite some nice features, but here I'm more or less just interested in this. So there is one context, that's a bit big, called dialogue, and there is like 4 translations to be done. And I will just start with that one and type Kommentarsuche. Maybe there's a better translation, I don't know. And mark that as done. I will, for now, just save it with that. I could continue, but we have limited time. Now it says to me that the TS file has been updated. Yes, just close it. And now I have a translation here for that one thing. The last thing I want to show before actually running it, hide that, is the main application. Because so far, we haven't shown how to actually install the translation. So you usually do that in main.cpp right before you execute your application. And in this case, I'm actually trying to load 2 QM files. One is from Qt, because Qt libraries also have text, user-visible text and dialogues and so on. So we provide translations for many languages for these. And one for my app. So it's a bit of a weird API. Actually, I hope I can improve that for Qt 6. But for now, the important part that there is Qt translator objects. And a Qt translator objects you can try to load a QM file into Qt translator object. And if that succeeds, you install it on the application. And from then on, these translations will be available. So let me try to run it. And it didn't translate because I probably haven't set up the language yet. I used the wrong. So usually I would change that in the settings now, but I wanted to just do it in the environment, which is possible on Linux. And you see that actually it's now has been translated in 2 places, in the title and in this QLabel here. So that's actually what I wanted to show in the very simple example. To sum up a bit, the keyword here is Qt translator to actually loading translations, and you can install several translators and QM files. You can also merge them by lconvert if you don't want to merge to ship too many files, but that's actually quite handy if you split up also your modules and so on. On the QML side, you can do the same if you have a C++ entry point, but there is also some magic. So if you use QML application engine, it actually tries automatically load files following a certain pattern from the i18n directory relative to your main QML file. So if you ever encountered that, there is some magic there. Maybe we should have something similar for C++ too, so if you want to have that discussion, come to me afterwards. What have we seen more? So the advice is to use Qt restricted cast from ASCII or Qt no cast from ASCII. The difference is minor and very technical, but you should probably set one of these, not to, so that that you mark every string as translatable or not. You should also provide a default translation for your source language. So if you're writing your app in English, provide an English translations. Why? 3 reasons. Plural forms, but even if you don't care about plural forms. Second reason is that it's very easy to change the UI later on, because you can just change the QM file. So if you have a typo, right, or something like that, then you don't have to recompile. You just can update the English translation. Third reason is actually a bit technical. So if you look, or if we move back to the API, what I'm telling the app here to do is actually load the translation for the qlocale. Now the qlocale is not just empty, it's just the system locale. But there is not just one language. There can be multiple languages in locale. So I had this setting that I said languages equals en::de. So you can have a order of languages that you prefer. So I can say, actually my favorite language is French, but then I know German, and if nothing else works, I can also read English. And if you provide now a translation for German, but your program is written in French, it will pick up the translation because it doesn't know the language basically of the source code. So it might skip the actual language of your source code and prefer another translation. So to save you from all these hassles, just provide a default translation file for your language, even if it's empty. Some more advice, which probably should be obvious. Different languages have different lengths, so you should really use a layout system or anything like that, so that you don't have to, that layout is not just made for one language, because, for instance, in German, most texts tend to be longer. Finally, be nice to your translators, and one of that includes not only setting a sensible context, but also giving them help. So you have seen the Qt Linguist, that it actually previews the dialogue. Well, that works if the translator has the source code available, and Qt Linguist can show the dialogue. But if you're sending it to a translation agency, they normally don't have that. So they just get long lists of text, and without any context information, it's actually sometimes hard to figure out what it means. So there is this option to place a comment here, and the trick here is the dot, if you notice that. So works, by the way, also with the C comments, and this one is then also extracted from lupdate. So that was actually the most important things I wanted to show about translations. Now I want to quickly dive into further localization classes. One is qlocale. Well, I have mentioned it now a couple of times. So qlocale is the representation of the system locale, or you can also load different locale explicitly. But it also has quite some nice API that can be handy. So qlocale can be used to automatically format a string, an integer. You see that at the top. That's what also the ln did. You can do that explicitly. It has also options to, for instance, show currencies. So by default, it just uses the currency of the country, which is, probably might lead to confusions if you start your app then somewhere else. If euros suddenly are converted into dollars, that might be surprising. But there is also an argument to pass then the euro sign. But the important thing is that if you do that in English, for instance, or with the US locale, it will say dollar and then 12, whatever. There is also ways to format time, so AM, PM versus this more European format, and even for data sizes. So quite a handy class. What's more, sorting. So often you have a list and you want to show it to the users and then you want to sort it. And a lot of times people just use, for instance, qstring list sort, which works, but on Unicode code points. So actually, it sort of works. It's not kind of completely works, but every country and every language has its own way of sorting. And then there is these magic characters with in German, like the umlaut, right? Ä, Ü, Ä, and so on. And how actually they should be sorted depends on the locale. So there is actually multiple methods you can use. There is qstring, local aware compare, but you can also directly go for qcollator. That's the class that exactly does that. And just to give you a very simple example, so this one just sorts this list. It also has options, for instance, sorting numbers correctly. So quite a handy class if you ever run into this. Finally, I want to mention right-to-left languages. So most famous example is Arabian. And yeah, well, they write right to left. And the good message is Qt does it almost automatically for you. So there is nothing you have to do magically and kind of tweak. So the string will automatically start from right to left. But the general advice is also that you might want to consider actually mirroring your whole layout. Why? Because people, English and German readers are tending to start looking at the left screen and reading from there, while in these countries they start reading from the right. So if you look, I don't know, a file browser might make sense to have the directory tree on the right side, not on the left side. So that obviously always a bit depends on your exact use case, so there is no magic to do that, but there is the knobs. So all the Qt classes, the layouts have a simple property that you can say mirror, and then the whole thing is mirrored. So that actually concludes what I wanted to show to you, and I guess we have time for questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Just in time. So, referring to localizations, just please raise your hand who is coming outside from Germany. Wow, okay, good, good. And now, questions. First.
Do validators support locale?
Pardon?
Do validators support locale, like date input, currency input, when we need to validate them? Or do we always have to do it by hand?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
The validators on the input fields, like the
validators on the input fields. Well, speaking, I would have to look it up. I would assume that they work the same. So I know that the input fields, for instance, right to left, will also just work. But
well, as you know, the date is presented differently in different countries.
I mean, if you
especially in the US.
If you're setting, there is different validators. If you have a line validator and say I don't know, the date should be entered like this, then obviously, it will enforce that. But if you're just setting a general date locale, it should work.
It is possible to translate on the fly, so without closing the app?
Yes, that's possible. That's actually quite easy in QML. Because there is one function which you can call, which just evaluates all bindings anew. So what you do is you're setting a new default locale, then you trigger that, and then the bindings, which includes QSTR, are reevaluated. For QWidgets, it's also possible, and actually the default classes do that. It just tends to require some effort from you when you're writing your own widgets, because the problem is there is an event which is delivered to all widgets called language changed, I believe, QEvent language change. And you have to handle that. So if you have the habit of, for instance, writing a class or a widget in the constructor and just layouting everything there, like most people do, arguably, then there won't be an update. What you have to do is you have to write a method, retranslate_UI, and call that first in the constructor, and then whenever that message, that event appears. So it's a bit of work, but yeah, it always depends. So for instance, in Qt Creator, we just said, you know, it's not that often a use case, so we just require people to restart. But if you're using, for instance, Qt Designer extensively, that's built in. So the forms in Qt Designer automatically have that.
Thank you. One more question?
You did not mention ID-based translation in your talk. Is this not recommended?
So ID-based translations means that you don't have the real, the natural language in your source code, but just have an ID and extra. Yeah, we added that feature for a big customer of ours who was making phones and is not with us anymore. But it's still there. It has still, it will work, but in general, honestly speaking, personally, I never see the point. So it's supported, but a bit kind of, you know, in the darker corner.
And probably we will have a small time for the last question. Who's next? Okay. Sorry.
So you mentioned that you can add commands in the source code.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to add commands in the UI files?
I think so. Shall we look it up?
Yeah, please.
I think there must be a comment there too, but I'm not using. I'm one of these guys who don't use UI files. So translation. Fine. Well, I will ask the right person. There should be a text field. And then there is disambiguation and comment. I would have been surprised if that isn't there.
All right. Thank you very much for the attention. Thank you very much, Kai, for the presentation.